What's going on, everybody? This is the blockchain backer bringing you the latest cryptocurrency news and analysis. Today, we've got a breakout over here on the Bitcoin price chart as Bitcoin has cleared through $32,000 yesterday, triggering FOMO and short liquidations to the heavens as Bitcoin not only got through 32,000, but 33,000, 34,000, 35,000 very, very quickly, as we did expect we would see happen over here for Bitcoin. To make it oh so sweet, of course, we've been watching this. We've been expecting this to happen over here for Bitcoin, and for us to finally get out of here. We never wavered from that as long as 24.7K held. But what makes it even oh so more sweet to finally get out of there, not only for those lows to hold, but to finally leave that over 220-day range that we have been stuck in here for Bitcoin, as prices really caught a nice bid yesterday. And we see stuff happening over there on altcoins as well. And you can see there's a little bit of red over there today, but there were breakouts that actually happened yesterday. And today is more of kind of just like a little bit of a pullback happening over here in the market today after such a substantial move happening yesterday. But as Bitcoin has broken out, today is really more of a day of just kind of celebration that we've left the range, all that fear, doom calling, all of that. September's going to be terrible. October's going to be bad. Death crosses, all that stuff, right? We finally got through the top of the range. Today is just a celebration, really, of getting through that. But, as we get through there, then it becomes looking forward to now where the new range builds. We've talked all about the price behavior of Bitcoin leading up to new runs happening, and that if there is to be some type of run that would happen for Bitcoin, the thing that has always happened is that we build ranges, break into new ranges, continue those ranges, and then break into new ranges, which is what we had happen back here in 2012 and 2013, over here in 2015 and 2016, even over here in 2019, which was a backtest of a range that had never been backtested. And well, here we go right now. We have finally left this range and are entering potentially a new one. But of course, with every time we've gotten to the top of a range, we've had Bitcoin to $1 million in 90 days. We're going to 12K. Bitcoin, brand new all-time highs. There's no way we're doing a tracement. We're going to 12K. And then undoubtedly what we'll see is people cheering for new all-time highs as we now take out the top of the range. Of course, as we know, Bitcoin is still just working on retracement levels. It still has not even crossed its 382 Fibonacci retracement level at this point. And there's still a lot of work that needs to happen for Bitcoin before that can even be considered. So as we break from the range, the question is, what comes next? Does this mean we automatically go to the moon? Does it mean we actually only have 7 more days of price action to the upside and then enter another 200-day range? Does it mean we're actually just going to catch up to retracement levels and to where the technology index is with the NASDAQ? Back to 702, straight lining just like it did? Or is this just a big bounce right back into retracement levels here around $38,000, $42,000 before Doomtown sets in for Bitcoin, as we've seen with Ethereum, and as the stock market comes crumbling down? Or am I just a silly guy for thinking any of that? And everything we've seen going on here, as we've shown in here, compared to 2020, is just right here. And what we've just seen happen today is the start of something majestic. Well, if you've followed this channel for the last couple of years, you would know what my thoughts are. We're just getting a retracement out of Bitcoin happening in here. I've stuck to my guns on that the whole time. Still think we have more upside left in Bitcoin. But now it's time for the rubber to meet the road and for a lot of these ideas and theses to start proving themselves or invalidating themselves, as price has now shoved its way up. 12Kers in disbelief, euphoria entering, bearish theses being capitulated on, but still just a retracement. So let's dive into what's going on with Bitcoin. I don't want to put a damper on the fact that it is absolutely a wonderful day for us to get through here. There was so much worry and fear of $12,000, $23,000, $20,000, $16,000 happening in here. We stuck to our guns. That wasn't going to be the case happening in here. We got through it. But just because we get through doesn't mean there isn't resistance up ahead. And so it's time to start taking a look at those. So that way, as we get there, we know they're there. But if we get through them, we can start checking them off and saying, nope, nope, nope. But again, I do want to reiterate, not to be confused, it is a celebration day. It is a day to be happy. It's a victory. It's a validation of belief. It's a validation of tenacity and sticking to your guns. If you stayed with it through all of that difficulty there, you got rewarded. That is something for celebration. But for me, it's always about, well, where to next? So the first thing we'll talk about is just the elephant in the room, the fact that it's still following 2016. This is absurd. This is still the champion. If this continues to follow like this and it continues to play out like this, it means my idea on a retracement is wrong. It means new all-time highs coming anytime soon are wrong. It means that we've got approximately a week left, and then we build another 200-day range. So far, we have to acknowledge this has still been the case. This hasn't deviated. This hasn't broken. This hasn't changed. It is still the champion. Anything else that is speculated on is just speculating that it's going to change from this. But I've been putting out a lot of content to show how this thing has been following itself with a lot of these huge pivotal moments happening within hours of themselves, even if they're 700 days later or 300 days later and happening within a couple of hours of each other, that this thing has really just been on point. It's not possible for me to explain why it's doing that. If it's the market makers acting on it on a particular schedule, why it's acting this way, I don't know. But it's been following it for like over 900 days. Let's do the math. 924 days in here. Anything different from this is just total speculation guessing, right? Technically, even thinking it's going to follow this is just speculation, right? But keeping that in mind, that when we go back to 2016, what did we do? We would break from a range, backtest the top of the previous range, and still just continue in a new one, right? This range lasted 213 days. This next range lasted another 200 plus days. If Bitcoin is going into some whole new cycle all over again, that means we've got about another week left of fun, then back to another 200-day range like we just went through. And so far, Bitcoin hasn't done anything to say that's not going to be the case. So as of right now, that seems to be a very real possibility. For those who believe in four-year cycles, who believe in block reward halving theory, and who believe that we're going to start a whole new cycle on Bitcoin, this is actually your long-term bullish thesis. This is really kind of what you want. If you're wanting to see Bitcoin rampage like significant all-time highs, well, you kind of have a blueprint on how that happens. And for that blueprint to continue, it would mean you've got about another week of this breakout continuing. Then a new range is formed, as we're doing right now. And then, sometime in 2024, we start trying to shoot towards those all-time highs. So it's kind of one of those reasons why I'm starting this video and it's like, hey, today is a day of celebration, but it's like time to look forward, because it's like, if that's the case, it's a week away, right? There's not really a whole lot of time to be like sitting here becoming moon boys and being crazy about it, but kind of being like, all right, not get blindsided by that range is there if that is the continuation of this thing. So in the coming week or two, this will really kind of be the thing that we're going to be paying attention to here on the YouTube channel, is that, hey, this timing thing has really been behaving oddly similar. If we get some type of quick rejection where you see Bitcoin fall, 25% relatively rapidly, maybe 30%, kind of expecting that we're doing something like A, B, C correction. But what we would be looking for is to build supports again on top of the previous range and do what we've done in each recovery mode. Is that right? You get the breakout. Notice the stall above the breakout, moving up, and then ABC correction to backtest the top of the range, and then up and away you go. What's the thing that we definitely notice about this, right? It's that when we have a pullback, we should just be backtesting the top of the range. You could see, you can wick a little bit below it. We could see we can wick a little bit below it. You can see here, even here in 2023, we can wick, I'll take this off. We can wick a little bit below, but we shouldn't be coming back and closing down here, right? We should have a new support range built, and that pullback would just be a test. So if we are still following the recovery behavior for Bitcoin, that is going to take a lot longer than probably a lot of people want. It would indicate we probably still have about another week up of upward price action here for Bitcoin. But then to be mindful that this range will need to be retested in here. Now, the question that comes from there that I don't really have an answer for or a strong speculation on is where does that peak come in before that correction would end up happening? We can't use this fractal as a way to say it's going to stop right here at 43K. Why is that? Because price hasn't like been right on top of the fractals, right? I mean, if we had like sat right here on top of these prices and we broke out at the same levels, then we'd be like, okay, then we can do that. But we can see even though price behavior has been identical, it hasn't occurred from the same price levels. I mean, this peak's way up here compared to like 2015, 2014. It's way down here, right? Like we're kind of catching up, but it doesn't mean that it's going to occur in any way like this. So, I went through 2017, I went through that bull run, and I went through multiple corrections in 2017. And the thing that we always ended up having were like almost these 40% corrections that just kept happening for Bitcoin. Back in September of 2017, the correction was 40%. Back over here in the summer of 2017, June through July, the correction was 38%. Then you go back to that correction where it's like an ABC on top of that range. And when we're talking about right here, this is a 40% correction. We could see that, we went pretty overbought here on the daily time frame, but still we stayed overbought for quite some time before really it just fell apart. I don't know if we're going to really get the signals from that. In addition, like when you look at this fractal behavior in here, you could see the green, it exceeds way over here above these peaks over here. That's new all-time highs for Bitcoin. But like if you said, hey, it's going to have a 40% correction and it's going to pull back to backtest these support levels. So how high would you go to have, 38, 39, 40% correction? That gets you to just a little bit over $50,000. The interesting thing about that level is it does end up getting you to where just shy of the 702 Fibonacci retracement. But the thing that we know is that Bitcoin's been real responsive to its actual market cap and really getting all the way up there to that 702 retracement and pulling back down there to backtest that support is a 40% correction. So while this is not like a perfect science, this does get you back to the retracement levels and then takes a long time to try to have to work back through them again and then finally get through them later. It does also match the correction size of what we had happen back in here, but not a science, and I think it's going to be pretty darn difficult to try to pick where would that moment happen from. I would say the one thing we can just defer from it is that it got far enough away to where it did a 40% correction, which has confluence with the market cap getting to the 702 retracement and then doing a 40% correction back down to supports. Otherwise, we're having to say it's going to all-time highs just based on the fractal, and I'm not comfortable doing that. But a 40% correction from higher prices back down to backtest, it actually gets us all the way up to the retracement level. So I could see that being the case. And in one of the things we're going to talk about here in just a minute, it may also add some confluence to that particular price level being that area. Because as I was going through the intro of this video to talk about the different things outlined in here, the other thing is talking about catching up to the NDXT, which is the NASDAQ 100 technology sector. Now, every month I write 2 newsletters over here on blockchainbacker.substack.com. Perfect opportunity to shill my newsletter. But the big question is whether or not Bitcoin is money or is it technology? And I think the answer that most people would respond to is to say that it is both. It is both money and it is technology. However, I've made the argument since the inception of my YouTube channel that there is an extreme correlation between breakouts for Bitcoin into new all-time highs and the Dow Jones Industrial Average. There is a much tighter correlation to those things occurring and those events occurring of Bitcoin leaving a multi-year bear market and the Dow Jones leaving a multi-year bear market or range. The biggest discrepancy of time between the Dow Jones leaving and going into an all-time high and Bitcoin leaving and going into an all-time high is 56 days. It's the most time that has ever elapsed between both of them breaking out into multi-year all-time highs. However, there has never even been a time where Bitcoin has broken out within 56 days of the block reward halving. It's been either 80 or 90 days, or it's been 180 days, or it's been 210 days. Never really consistent, but it's always like within 8 weeks of the Dow Jones Industrial Average breaking out. But the question is current price action as it's been ranging acting like money or acting like big tech? And when we overlay Bitcoin on top of the NDXT, which is the NASDAQ 100 technology sector, there is an extreme correlation to the top of the market coming in and the bottom of the market coming in. If we do the same example for the Dow Jones Industrial Average during its ranging behavior, we can see there's a much bigger spread of time between the tops, which is 58 days, and the bottoms, which is 40 days. In addition, while Bitcoin's sitting at the bottom, literally at the bottom, the Dow has already gone all the way back up to the retracement levels. We know FTX played a role in that, but I'm going to show you something with tech here in a minute. But here we are way down here, and you've already got the Dow all the way back up here, right? 56-day spread between the tops. But we look over here at the NDXT, the NASDAQ 100 technology sector. Look how tight that is. Much fewer days here between peaks. You got 14 days. Also, look at the bottoms in here. Look at the price behavior happening in here. 27 days. And then what's really amazing is look at the breakout time periods. Look at it coming off these lows. Look at Bitcoin coming off the lows together. And I think what's really amazing about that at the same time is what has actually happened right here. And I'm going to take everything off the screen to show you that we just watched tech and we just watched Bitcoin range in the same area. And not only that, but taking Bitcoin off the screen, does that correction look familiar? It's literally exactly what we just did over here for Bitcoin. It's the same exact range, same exact correction. You see the new high get set in here. You see the liquidations happen back down in here without setting a new low. You see it building supports on top of its previous range that it spent in here. Then it breaks out and goes. And so here we are with Bitcoin now, kind of in that early phase of just getting a breakout happening right now. And what we know happened with big tech is big tech has gone back to where? 702 Fibonacci retracement. Same correction, same level, comes off the bottom at the same place, and then it goes back to the 702 Fibonacci retracement. Price falling all at the same time, same consolidation price levels, but now lagging behind for Bitcoin, but trying to play catch up to big tech. And what big tech did was it went back over here, right, to these April highs in here, which is at the 702 retracement for Bitcoin. There you go. That's, the March and April highs over here, back in those exact same levels. And so again, it begs the question, block reward halvings, big tech, 4-year cycle theory. Again, is this all just the stock market? Are we behaving like big tech? Considering we acted like big tech all the way down, we came off the lows with big tech. We did a similar consolidation, but now lagging behind. If we were to play catch up to big tech, where does it get you to? It gets you right there to the retrace levels. And that would kind of have some confluence with what we're talking about there, a 40% correction that eventually comes back to back test the top of the previous range. And we've seen the same consolidation happen over here for big tech, holding the lows, right? New high, new higher low. Where does it go? Retrace levels and stops. And if we get that here with Bitcoin, that gets you back there too. So I think that has a little bit of confluence with what we're seeing on how precise Bitcoin has been with 2016. And if we're playing catch up to big tech, as we've behaved so confluently with, it would make a lot of sense for that to be where all that resistance is there for Bitcoin. And so in the newsletter that was put out in the middle of this month, that's really what we were talking about in there. Bitcoin finally playing catch up after consolidating in the same region as the NDXT and finally reaching its retracement levels, as Bitcoin was still sitting there in like the 27, 28,000s. And so far that idea seems to be playing out. So the point of that really is that, hey, we're still following 2016. It's still right on schedule. If it's going to stay on schedule, well, where would it be heading to? The examples we have from the past are 40% corrections. Where would a 40% correction happen from? It happened from about $50,000. A 40% correction back to support would have confluence with the market cap hitting the 702 retracement, which is what we've talked about for years. And then the confluence of Bitcoin with big tech is that same exact price level. So there's kind of a whirlwind of confluence there pointing to that region. And if we're following how big tech got there, we're on our way right now. You could see that big tech had several waves to get there, like pulling back down to 31, 32,000, breaking up to 40,000, consolidating there, and then breaking up to 45,000. And then finally that last push to get you up there to 50K. and then boom, you're done. But it would be that we're already on the journey there right now. So that is interesting for 2016 and with confluence of the NDXT. Now we'll touch on this Doomtown scenario really quick because we pretty much have some hard rules in here to see how this scenario actually ended up playing out for Ethereum and how we've seen these play out for other assets such as Netflix. After full extensions have been reached, when you bounce from these areas just below the previous all-time high, like so here for Ethereum from 2017, 2018, and still continue down much further. What we know about the rules of all of Bitcoin's recoveries is that backtests of previous range height happen all the way until we get to the all-time high. But what doesn't happen is breaking down below those ranges. It's merely backtesting the tops of these previous ranges and then continuing on. If we have watched the completion of the third super cycle of Bitcoin, if it is super weak, if the stock market is going to crash and crumble and go down into the ground and take Bitcoin with it, one of the things we can look for that would be very different from recoveries of historical behavior is if Bitcoin breaks down, the previous resistance turned to support, and then starts closing candles underneath it. We know in all recoveries, we should be continuing up, finding ranges, shifting up, and continuing on. If for some reason we turn over and start closing candles back in the 28s, 29s, and just hang out in this range, we're showing exceptional weakness. We could see on the NDXT, we shouldn't have done that. We could see in all of Bitcoin's recoveries throughout history, we shouldn't do that. If we start closing below $31,000 and settling price and accepting prices in the 28th, it may be validating the idea that this stock market is not healthy and that Bitcoin is not going to do well during that time. This idea is something that shouldn't be panicked about for me, unless if we lose the top of the previous range and start closing below it, because we know we shouldn't do that. We should continue climbing and backtest, continue climbing and backtest, climbing and backtest. If we break down and accept prices down here, we're weak. So in the event that Bitcoin doesn't get to $50,000 or doesn't get up to 45, whatever, and it loses this new breakout level that we just had happen yesterday, that's where this starts becoming a very real possibility for Bitcoin. And again, I'll still say 12Kers, you're wrong. There's no reason for Bitcoin to go to 12K. I won't argue that today, but what would happen in this event is it would likely be signaling Bitcoin is exceptionally weak. And that was the end of an entire multi-super cycle, grand super cycle for Bitcoin, having it been the third completed super cycle for Bitcoin in its history. And with those three super cycles happening to happen during the three major waves of the United States stock market. Your 2013 bull run, your 2017 bull run, and your 2021 bull run. And if we start accepting prices below 31,000, especially into the lower 30s or into the 29s for sure, we will have lost all that once was of 2016 or of any recovery for Bitcoin ever. So we'll keep this one brief, but this one becomes a reality in the event that we do go back for a back test and then something goes terribly wrong where we start seeing 28,000s and we actually close a day there. So in the event that that happens, all my thoughts would change immediately in the way I view Bitcoin. But as of right now, there's no signals of that happening. But in the event that we do, I'll be screaming, run for the hills. So we'll move on from that and keep that one really brief. But things get very sketchy in the event that we actually lose the support, because we know that shouldn't happen in our recoveries. And so far, we've remained consistent with that behavior of support building on top of previous ranges and then leaving them. And so we should find our support on top of the previous resistance. I could see there being some crazy wick that takes us right back down here to about $30,000. But I definitely would feel very uncomfortable if we are closing candles down here in the 28s and lower 29s. And to understand why I was so convicted about why we could not go set new lows down here below $24,700 is because to do so would have violated every recovery for Bitcoin ever. And still, moving forward, we're going to try to remain true with that. Now, we'll move on from doom talk and we'll talk about moon talk. The one that would definitely catch me by surprise. It's not in my base thesis, but the reality is this whole price action that we had in here was, of course, referenced to for the last 2 months of 2020. And that moment prior to taking off in 2020 is exactly what we just did in here in 2023. And as we know, in that moment right there, what did it eventually lead to? It led to absolute crazy intense euphoria and a big giant fat bull run. Again, this is not my base case. But the reality is this price action here from 2020 is exactly what we just did here in 2023. And so what was the thing that happened here, which you can even see directly from the fractal on where price action actually gets to. It gets right back there to the exact prices we're just talking about over here in the 2016 model, right? Going back to the retracement levels, going back to the NDXT. It finds all of its resistance there between, $50,000 and $51,000, consolidates there to work through it, and then goes in for the full-blown breakout. So right now, obviously, we're stuck with the conundrum here of if Bitcoin is tied to big tech, and big tech is back at its 702 retracement, and Bitcoin goes and catches up to it and catches up to that 702 retracement. But then what? What if big tech breaks through, right? All scenarios we're talking about is that, big tech breaks down, maybe big tech waddles and eventually goes, or eventually big tech breaks down through the previous resistance support and it's really weak. And this is the end of big tech because big tech is a giant bubble. Big tech just had a massive crash. Big tech went back to a 702 retracement. The crash of big tech ended up being 47%. Have we ever seen it before where you have a 47% crash and go back to the 702 retracement? We certainly have. We saw it here in Bitcoin back in 2017 when the bubble popped. And then in 2018's bear market, Bitcoin fell all the way back down. It went back to its 702 retracement. And the initial fall was what? A 47% crash, exactly like the NDXT, exactly like big tech. 47% crash, back to 702 retracement. So, of course, these theories get brought up of, does Bitcoin just go back to a retracement and then, big tech bubble pops, stock market pops, and Bitcoin pops with it and breaks down, right? The end of 3 super cycles, which would be 1 grand super cycle, and that's the end. But in the event, of course, that big tech keeps roaring, well, then do we open the door to this? And maybe we do, right? That's been the things that I've always said. If you want to convince me that we're going to have a new all-time high, we've got to first see it over there in the stock market. Trying to show you those confluences of big tech and show you the confluence of Bitcoin. A lot of things point to us getting back to these retracement levels right in here. But at the same time, there are those concerns there with big tech of where it's at. That's a big crash, 47%. That's typically what happens in bubble pops. But in the event that we get all the way back to the retracement levels in here, and then big tech rips to the upside, maybe this becomes a reality. And it's hard for me to sit here and say, I think this is going to happen, because if you've followed this channel, the thing I've had conviction of is that we would go back into retracement levels. Then it all becomes theory, right? It becomes, do we reject at the retracement levels or break through them? The conviction has been, we'll get back there. Well, the world screams 12K. Well, the world screams, we're never coming back. You don't know anything. It's time to sell the bottom to buy lower. It's like, no, we typically go back to retracements. But you see the challenges that exist there back at those retracements. If NDXT is not getting through, if the stock market's in big trouble, I find it hard to believe Bitcoin's going to do some deviation and go off and do its own thing. But in the event that the stock market does break up, then hey, I could subscribe to the idea. Why? Because what was happening with the stock market here, which would be right here, you can throw it on and see. That is the moment the stock market was breaking out from the pre-C19 crash, right? Dow Jones gets back to its high and then breaks through its high. So Bitcoin breaks up with it. So I could subscribe to this in the event that the stock market rips faces and goes back to the all-time highs and then breaks out with it too. But otherwise, I think that's going to be dictated primarily by what is occurring in the rest of the market at the time. So keep your eyes on the NDXT, keep your eyes on the Dow Jones Industrial Average. And if we get something crazy happening there too, maybe we can talk about that with some seriousness. But I do want to point that out there, that the technology sector has gotten back to that 702 retracement after a 47% crash. And when we've seen that happen with Bitcoin, that did mark that it was actually the peak of the bubble and that this was the retracement, the return to normal. Everything is going to go roaring to the upside. And then what did we actually do? We actually ended up breaking down, right? So this thing turns up and shoots to the upside. I'll subscribe to it, but I'd want to see that first. And I think showing you all those confluences of the NDXT at this point kind of tells you, right? How could you possibly go up if the stock market isn't and if the technology sector isn't? So this would be the thing I'd be keeping my eyes on to subscribe to this idea with any seriousness. And that we do know this moment, put on daily, this moment for that breakout was marked with the stock market breaking out into the all-time high at the exact same time. So we'll keep our eyes on that when that comes, on how the stock market is reacting and how the NDXT is reacting at that time. But I think what we see is a massive amount of confluence in there when you look at Bitcoin's 2016 price behavior, which has been ridiculously on point, that if it's going to have a 40% correction to backtest the top of this range that we just left, where would we need to get to? Somewhere around $51,000, which just so happens to be the 702 retracement on the market cap. If we were going to follow the NDXT or the technology sector of the NASDAQ, after following it so well, where does it get us to? That same area, about $50,000 into a retracement level. If we were going to follow 2020, where's the big pivotal moment of where everything gets to? Again, that big decision-making zone happens there at that $51,000 level. So whether you're looking at 2016 and looking for a 40% correction to backtest the top of the range, whether you're looking at the NDXT, or even if you're using 2020's example, it seems like each of these take us up there to about $50,000. The one that would not, and that would issue bigger concern, big time for Bitcoin in a short amount of time, would be to immediately start losing 30,000, and especially if we start getting down into like the 28s or the 27,000s. Otherwise, we have a series of confluence events pointing to us really going back to retracement levels and really actually doing it pretty quickly. The big $1 million question out there is, what about the rest of the market, right? When does that thing have an opportunity to run? And with this video already being over 30 minutes, that's a whole nother video in itself. But if we are to see Bitcoin shoot up quickly and head towards $50,000, that's probably going to be the show-stopping event in this market. And the alts are probably going to have to wait for that to finish before we see something substantial come to the rest of the market. So I'll put out another video this week where we'll kind of talk about that through each scenario. But in the event that Bitcoin is going to quickly move up to $50,000 over the course of a couple weeks or less, Bitcoin is probably the show-stopping event for right now. So we'll address that. But either way, it's a super exciting time for the market. It just means it's going to be a few weeks later because we know it from XRP. We couldn't get a sustainable rise because we couldn't get it with Bitcoin. And we've known that Bitcoin is mandatory. And guess what? We're getting Bitcoin. Well, I love my XRP people. I have no problem picking on the Bitcoiners, but I have no problem picking on the XRP narratives at the same time. And I hope you guys can appreciate that. And the hardest pill to swallow is how important Bitcoin is. And the fact that we're getting Bitcoin, it's a great sign. Bitcoin's been my number 2 holding. Of course, it's great. The price is going up, but these numbers aren't big for Bitcoin. These percentages aren't huge. I mean, we're talking about here in just these last few days, Bitcoin's up 18%. Everybody's losing their mind. We could see pumps in XRP of 100% in a day. In just the last 24 hours, we saw Mina pump 140%, still up 70% in the last 24 hours. I do get it. We get impatient. These numbers aren't huge for Bitcoin. I treat my Bitcoin as really just ammunition to be able to unload on the altcoins. To each their own. I'm not telling you what to do, but I hold a bag of it specifically for that purpose. And we're entering the time period of unload because for the altcoins, this was necessary. I put out a 28-minute video over the weekend for XRP with 20 minutes of it being about Bitcoin. Why? Because this is necessary. And the good news is we have a lot of confluence out there. And finally, after 200 plus days, there is some sign of life breathing into Bitcoin. We've got a lot of confluence pointing us towards this actually going into real retracement levels. And then we have other things to be able to watch to say, hey, are we going to get through those retracement levels? And we have other things to watch too to say, hey, something's not right. Why is price getting back down to these levels? We know we shouldn't be, right? So I think all those things kind of got outlined in this video. And I think we've got to see a lot of confluence in there of 2016, 2020, pointing towards that bigger retracement is on its way right now. and the NDXT technology sector says it as well. In the event that Bitcoin is super weak and it starts breaking down these levels, it's hard to pick where this resistance could come in at. If Bitcoin is super weak and if Bitcoin is rolling over big time, my best speculative guess is that it's right around there, right around $39,000 to $38,000 of where that resistance would come in, and Bitcoin is just massively weak. So we'll keep an eye on that, as that would be like the first sign of big danger showing up for Bitcoin if we're just not able to get through $39,000, $40,000 right here, and especially if we just start breaking back down to the 27s and the 28s. Otherwise, all is well. We're behaving just like we should be. So rock and roll. Congrats to those who made it through this. Bitcoin, you're in a breakout. And on that note, we'll go ahead and start wrapping this thing up now that we're over 35 minutes into this. If you'd like to subscribe to my newsletter and get what we were talking about there with the NDXT, you could check this out over here on blockchainbacker.substack.com. I do also record every single one of these. So if you like listening to my silky smooth voice, there is an audio form of the newsletter as well. If you prefer the video format, of course, I do have bcbacker.com over here, which is a course with over 40 videos in it and over 11 hours of content. Very similar to my YouTube channel. I designed this thing to take people off of ground zero if you have no experience, or for those who have a ton of experience. I'm certain you'll learn something in here, whether it's about technical indicators, tools, patterns, Wyckoff accumulation and distribution, along with Elliott wave theory. But in here, a lot of the things that we've kind of talked about here, really understanding the Bitcoin bull runs, reviewing the altcoin seasons, and a lot of lessons that were learned between 2017 and 2021, along with that stock market and block reward halving. There's a lot of great info in here and downloadable PDFs, so you can save those onto your computer or print them out for yourself. You can check that out over here on bcbacker.com. There's both a link to bcbacker.com and to the newsletter here in the description of this YouTube video. Otherwise, I want to thank you so much for watching. If you could, please like this video and give it a thumbs up. If you're new to the channel, please subscribe and hit the notification bell so you can be notified of when I create new content and when I go live. As always, this is not investment advice and I am not a financial advisor, but if you ever need a pick-me-up or a little bit of reassurance, just remember that the blockchain backers got your back. Have a good one.